All right, hello everyone. We're going to wait just a bit longer for more of the participants to trickle in, but we'll probably get started no later than, let's say, 5 minutes after the hour.
Hey there. I just wanted to let people know that I just submitted an internet draft, which might be interesting to briefly talk about if anybody wants to skim through it real quickly. It's very short.
We'll get to the agenda bash in a minute, but it's basically all you today, Rowan. So I think if you want to discuss another document, that's perfectly fine. All right, it's 5 past the hour, so I think we can get started. All right, so welcome everyone to the December 18 MIMI Interim. We've been holding these every couple of weeks in between IETF plenaries. Although one programming note, we do not have one scheduled for in 2 weeks. That lands somewhere in the sort of dead zone during the holiday season. So we're skipping that one, and the following meeting will be a full month from today. Oops. All right. So first off, as usual, please make yourself aware of the IETF note well and the attendant policies on intellectual property and code of conduct. And finally, the agenda for today. So once again, it's the Rowan May show here at Mimi. We're going to start by reviewing some in-flight PRs on first Mimi content and then Mimi protocol. Then, as Rowan just pointed out in the chat, there is a draft, not yet adopted, I don't think, but being worked on in the MLS working group on AppSync. And I think Rowan wants to talk to us about the implications, like I guess the motivation for that and the implications for Mimi. Rowan, you said that there would be a new Mimi content draft. I'm not sure if that actually got published. Looking at the data tracker, we still have the just about to expire one from June.
It's actually expired, and I just wanted to get these PRs I can basically submit it after this meeting once we figure out what we're doing with these PRs.
Okay, yeah. So the changes in the PRs essentially constitute the new draft, so that's fine. And then, yeah, do you also want, I suppose instead of that new Mimi content draft item, do you also want to discuss the app components draft?
I'd like to preview the app component in 5 minutes.
Yep.
And if people want to talk about it, that's fine.
Okay, seems like we'll have time. So fine. So then I guess swap out new Mimi content draft for app components. Rowan, are you happy with the order here?
Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to discuss today? All right. In that case, we can get into the Mimi content PR.
Okay. So there are actually 3 Mimi content PRs now, but that's the biggest one. We can start with that.
Okay, give me a sec, and I will pull that up on. Sorry, I'm going to pull up the
share screen.
Yeah, exactly. Although, wait a sec. Let's see. All right, we're just going to look at PR number 35. There we go. Okay, is that big enough?
Sure. Okay.
Take it away, Ron. Or let me know if you
want
me to.
So we had a number of small issues, and I realized as I started to do a couple of PRs, and I realized that there's enough there's enough text that stacking the PRs basically doesn't really work. That without creating a bunch of merge conflicts. So I created this rather large PR with individual commits for each of the issues, and then there's some additional, sort of smaller commits for typos and things that were forgotten in the original, in the sort of the main commit for each of these issues. Just kind of going through the list, the first issue that this covers, removing tags from the URIs. That's pretty straightforward. So the CBOR working group feedback was basically, if you have a strong semantic where something is always a URI, then you don't need to put a tag to say that it's a URI. That it's more appropriate if you just want to have something where you might have a URI or you might have something else, and then that's where it's nice to have a tag where you can give specific context. In this case, the context is not, additional context is not needed. So the next thing here was support for relative expiration times. So basically, the way that expiring messages work in the current messaging systems, that it's actually a relative time based on the time when a receiver reads the message. So I might receive the message immediately, and then it expires, 5 minutes later for me. But you could receive the message 2 weeks later, and then as soon as you read it, then you have a 5-minute timer and you expire the message then. So I changed this to be able to express both relative and absolute times. And that's pretty straightforward. Timo, he suggested having a more extensible or flexible mechanism for expiration. And I asked him for an existence proof of what that might look like. And he gave 2 examples, one of which would be, hang on, let me refresh this so that I can actually see his comment. So he said, would be delete this message when the other user explicitly marked this message as read, as opposed to implicitly reading it and causing it to be marked as read, or when the other user has replied to this message. So that's not something that's sort of a common, that's not a feature that I've seen in any instant messaging products. Whether we want to add that as an extensibility point or not, I would be inclined to just leave what is sort of common, and somebody could add an extension later to do something a little bit more fancy like that. But we could add an extensibility point for expiration there. Does anyone want to make any comments on that?
Hello, is this working?
It's working.
Great.
Welcome.
So yeah, my comment was just that we provide a feature to extend this with more ideas we could have in 5 or 10 years or whatever. Just have more options in the future by not having it a Boolean variable, but an enum instead.
Well, it wouldn't just be an enum, it would be an enum with a variable struct, a variable format of the thing afterwards, right? Or potentially.
Which is inspired from the content, the single part, multi-part things, which has the same structure with an enum and different content types inside.
Does anybody else have an opinion on this?
So just to understand, this is to make it extensible, not to design something that doesn't exist yet, right? It's just to allow for that to be designed.
To allow for that within the expiration struct, as opposed to allowing for it as a sort of an outside in the extensions map.
I mean, I guess then my opinion is if it's just about the extensibility, that is not very expensive, then we should probably do that.
I'm sort of making a non-committal gesture off camera here. I mean, in general, adding protocol mechanisms for things that may happen 5 or 10 years down the road doesn't seem like a great trade-off. That seems like a good domain for extensibility mechanisms, extensions. But if it's relatively simple, maybe we can do it.
Yeah, I mean, the feedback that I have received from I think from a couple of implementers has been keep it simple. Don't try to add a bunch of stuff. And a lot of people have asked me to simplify the multi-part the multi-part part of the nested parts. And my sort of guiding star with that is that it should be possible, if you can do something in email, we should be able to do it in instant messaging, so that somebody doesn't say, oh, well, I used to be able to do this in email and now I can't do this in instant messaging. That's not really a great look for us. But for, sort of new things that might happen in the future, I tend to agree with Richard, and we could still do that using the generic extensions map.
Also, there's a ton of things that exist in email that do not exist in any messaging product. Like, I'm not aware of any messaging product that implements BCC. So if email is the argument, that doesn't seem super compelling either.
Okay, so what I'm going to propose to do here is to make this a standalone issue about whether we want extensibility of expiration, and then I propose that we go ahead and, assuming we get through all of these issues here, that we merge this PR and we leave that next issue open. We discuss it on the list. That sound okay to everybody?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. So I'm creating a new issue. Should expiration types be extensible beyond absolute and relative? Okay, I'll fill that in later, but that's issue number 39. Okay, going back to the list of topics here. So the next thing was to give additional guidance on GitHub flavored Markdown. So we really need to have some kind of mandatory to implement format. And I think it's good for us to have something that's beyond plain text. So I propose GitHub flavored Markdown. Timo pointed out that there are a bunch of places in the spec that are, things that we wanted to give additional guidance. So basically, I specified which extensions he pointed, but then I also proposed that we not support raw HTML because that's a big can of worms. And I don't remember if it was Marvin or Timo said that's not really, I think it was Marvin said that that's not really GitHub flavored Markdown if you remove all tags. So it's too bad he's not here right now. In any case, what I proposed was creating a new name for a variant called variant GFM-no HTML, and we could register that, and we just say that it is exactly GitHub flavored Markdown, where all HTML tags, and processing instructions, and HTML comments are all forbidden. So unless I get some sort of strong objection to this, I would be inclined to go ahead and put that into this PR and let it go.
Oh, sorry, I skipped the queue. Sorry.
Tim.
Okay, so I agree like Markdown is the right goal here. Like I think that's the syntax that people expect to be able to write up messages in. But what I wonder is there like a sufficiently robust specification of any Markdown or GitHub flavored Markdown, and perhaps more to the point, one that we can reference from IETF documents?
So the reference for GFM is in the document, and it's quite thorough, and it's been stable.
Okay, like perhaps I'm showing my ignorance here, but is there precedent for IETF documents referencing this
Well,
the
there
specification?
already is an RFC which mentions different varieties of Markdown and has references to at least 6 types of Markdown and their stable references.
Okay, sounds good.
Including Common Mark and GFM.
I was just worried we were wading into like a protobuf style situation, but it sounds like there are sufficiently sturdy references here for us. Cool, thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm mostly worried about that GitHub flavored Markdown has some features that we don't want. For example, that enumerated lists always increase by 1. It is one thing I mentioned multiple times. And numbered lists cannot start with a leading 0, or some things where Markdown renderers change the meaning of the text, which is not always what you want.
Yeah, so I mean, this has to be about anything that we specify can only say, if you get this Markdown, this is how you render it. And we need something with a stable reference. So I don't think that we want to be, if the main objections that we're having to using GFM are that it would be nice if we could do more, if we had more choice in the rendering of the leading numeral of ordered lists, I think that we're in pretty good shape. Because I mean, we're not going to develop a spec as thorough as the GFM spec, and frankly, we don't have the expertise to do that at IETF. And that this is basically a single issue that is like unfortunate about GFM, but it's also not something that's like really a deal breaker for most users, in my opinion. So
yeah, I also think it's unfortunate that this is the stable reference we can use, but it has some problems that make it not ideal for instant messaging. And it would be great to have another reference somewhere, which defines a better standard.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, I would say we should go forward with this unless you can come up with another Markdown variant that has a stable reference. I mean, the other one would be Common Mark, but I think Common Mark has the same problem with numbered lists.
Okay, I will look more into it, but the change you're making in this PR is always a step in the right direction, at least.
Okay, good.
So keep it for now.
So I'm going to just take a moment to give a reference to the text Markdown media type RFC. It's 7763. Okay. All right. Next issue, allow users other than the sender to edit and delete messages. So this is basically moderators and administrators. So Tim, if you want to go down to scroll down a page there and click on the commit sorry, up. You're going too far. Just a tiny bit down, just basically the next page down from there. Right there. Yeah. See the commits? So there's a commit, change expiration, discuss authorization rendering of edits, deletes. So if you click on the commit ID, it'll show the specific language that I changed. And so basically what all this says is, no, this is the wrong one. Anyway, there is the language that has been changed here is that it says that you need to be authorized to send an edit. So some groups may have special policies or permissions allowing specific types of edits or deletes. For example, a moderator in one room might be allowed to edit the topic of a message. This is line 1397. Scroll down a tiny bit more. 1397. Yeah. This paragraph that's just below the resolve conversation button that I can see on the screen. 1397. So this is the specific language here that 1397. Yes, there we go. Yeah.
Sorry.
So this talks about special policies and permissions that you might have to allow this. And then Britta had a comment here. I said, receiving clients shouldn't allow parties other than the original sender to edit or delete that message. I think what I was trying to say was that, that this could be policy dependent, but I think unless there is a specific concrete authorization policy which allows it. So she proposed that we change this to a must not allow parties unless there is a specific concrete authorization policy which allows it. I'm fine with making that small change, but this is basically how we would go about doing this safely. That we're giving very concrete guidance, like you can edit or delete your own message if that's something that's that's generally allowed for particular users, but that overall we're going to use a policy mechanism to say that you're allowed to delete other users' content. For example, if you're a moderator or an admin, or you're allowed to edit other users' contents. For example, to edit the topic, to change it into a new thread, to move it into a different thread. So this is something that will be, that I'll kind of I'll show the existence proof for this with the draft that I just submitted this morning. That kind of shows how there can be a mechanism to make this work. All right, so moving back to, so unless anyone objects, I'm going to change that should not to a must not, as Britta suggested. And then the next item on our list here is manipulating topic ID. So this is the same kind of issue. This is if you have permission to edit a message where you only edit the topic ID, and there is a in the draft that I submitted, there is a specific capability that says change the topic of an existing message. So this would be an edit that doesn't change any of the content of the message, but only changes the topic ID. All right. Okay, we had this get rid of the part index or make it optional. So I don't think making it optional makes any sense, but right now we have this explicit number, the part index, which is in every part. So at the moment, you have it was explicitly listed everywhere. And someone pointed out that if it's explicitly listed, then you need to both calculate it and then verify it by checking it. So this particular commit just removed part index as an explicit field and just made it an implicit field that was calculated by walking through the message, which you would have to do anyway anytime you verified a message. I then got some private feedback from somebody who wanted to do signatures on messages, but only wanted to basically they wanted to be able to sign individual parts of the message separately. And in order to do that, they wanted to have the part index included. Tim?
That sounds like maybe they have a canonicalization step before they either sign or verify a message. I mean, if you were just arguing that the part index can be like deterministically computed based on the broader context of the sequence of messages.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if they have a signature scheme that isn't part of the base Mimi thing, then ostensibly they need to define some kind of canonicalization no matter what. And that could include computing the part index and spelling out how to include it in the payload to be signed.
Yeah, they wanted it to be explicit so that the part index could be, shall we say, so that you could sign the part index, which was in the nested part, and then you would merely compare that matched the calculated part index inside of the message. So, like in history, that you would be able to. Yeah, that you'd be able to both validate it post facto and that you'd be able to make sure that it matched inside of the message. So I don't have a strong feeling there. I would say if we, in the absence of some kind of example, that we would just go ahead and remove it, and then we could add it back if we have a compelling reason to do so, like a worked example. Okay.
Yeah, it makes sense to me because I don't think that the signature scheme, which sounds like that was the requirement, the potential requirement in one implementation of a signature scheme over individual messages, was the one argument that we have in hand against removing part index. And it feels like there's a path forward to solving that without requiring every Mimi implementation to put part index into every single message. So I am agreeing with you, Ron.
Okay. All right. Last two here. So this is the RFC 2392 URI. This is the content ID URI. So there's text in here. Again, if somebody wants to go to the commits B17 C7F3, there is a paragraph here. The part ID can be used inside a content ID URI in a container part, for example, HTML, Markdown, vCard, or iCal, to reference another part inside the same Mimi message. And so this is, in my opinion, this is a legitimate use of the existing content ID URI. It's just saying that inside of a container, any type that is a container, it can have a content ID, and it's going to point to something which has a particular part index inside of the larger Mimi message. That's the format of the CID URI for that. And Bob's your uncle. Going back to the list, the last one was creating an IANA registry for Mimi content extension map keys. So again, this is pretty small. So this has that's a lot of text, but it says that there is an integer key or a key which can be an integer, a name, an optional CBOR type, whether it's recommended or not, and then the reference is what goes in the sort of the structure in the draft. I'm not sure if this will show up in the. No, that looks like gobbledygook. No, I'm not gonna. It's line 1377 as the table from the. So a key, which is either integer or text string, a name, a type, a CBOR type, which could be any, or it could be, B string, text string, array, whatever, right? You specify what it is. R is whether it's recommended, yes, no, or deprecated, and then reference. So this is just borrowing. This is borrowing basically a pattern that has been used over and over again. This particular pattern I borrowed from MLS Safer Suites. So I'm, unless there's any sort of discussion on this one, I'm going to propose making these, making the handful of changes that I previously mentioned here. So defining a new, defining a markdown variant, which is GFM, no HTML. Changing the should not allow parties to edit and delete to must not unless there's specific authorization. And fixing a couple of typos that Timo found. And yeah, that's it. So those are I would do those right after this meeting and go ahead and merge unless somebody has an objection. Timo?
Hello. I'd just like to ask if we could keep issue 30 open because there's some related discussion about whether we want complicated nesting at all. The second to last one.
The
If you
content
open that
ID,
issue, you can see Marvin and I exchanged some thoughts with Rohan.
okay.
I don't know if how we should continue this discussion. But
We would still get rid of content of part index. We'd still include 31 in this.
Sorry. Yeah, 31 is good. I'm not talking about 31.
Okay, so I can yank this commit and save it somewhere, and we can carry on.
So I'm okay with doing this commit as well, number 30, but just because if we want to continue the path like we are doing, then I think it's a good change. But we should reconsider whether we want a simpler format for the content structure.
So do you want us to keep issue number 30 open as well, and we reference that?
I'm only talking about issue 30.
Okay, we keep issue 30 open.
Yes, but keep the PR as it is.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
And in particular, so the notion is to take the PR as it is, but with the tweaks that you enumerated, and then publish that as the next draft of Mimi content.
Well, if there are other PRs, there are 2 other PRs that are open right now. So if whatever PRs we merge in the next day or 2, that does become the next version of Mimi content.
Okay.
All right. So
I think that's it for that big PR. Next up is excuse me. Next up is the Mimi protocol PRs.
No, can we do the other 2 PRs on Mimi content?
Oh yeah, no problem. All right.
Okay. So 36 is change message ID construction. So this one. So the new algorithm is described here, but this takes it adds a mandatory salt at the beginning of the message. And then the message ID is basically the hash of the Mimi content, the first 31 octets of that, and you prefix it with the hash function that you used to do it. The idea is that the hash function is SHA-256 until we say that's deprecated, you should use something else, but that you will always be able to look at a message ID and figure out that it was calculated using a particular hash. So that's not intended to be like hash proliferation, but hash agility for rolling forward after a deprecated hash. I think I specifically targeted, I wanted Conrad and Raphael to weigh in on this, but this has, this is really easy to calculate. And it also solves this problem of the in reply to having to have two hashes. Because you can't, and it has this nice property that even if you get the history of some history, and then you see a reply, somebody couldn't have forged the original message that something was replied to because it was based on the hash. You would have had to have a birthday attack on that hash in order to successfully, spoof the original message. So even if you don't have any other integrity properties of the rest of your history, that if you see a reply to message and the message ID in reply to matches the content that you have for the original message, then the original message was correctly identified. The content was correct.
Yeah, I guess so. Neither Conrad nor I had a look at it. So yeah, if you don't mind leaving that open for a bit longer, so
okay,
that we can look at it.
Do you think you guys would be able to look at it within the next day?
Conrad is on holidays until the end of the month, so
okay.
I can look into it tomorrow, but I think it would make sense that Conrad also looks into it.
Okay, I mean, I think it's a pretty simple. It's a pretty simple algorithm. It's not super complicated. So if you just if you give your opinion, if you think you still would like Conrad to have a look at it, we can keep it out. But I know a lot of people were really excited by an algorithm like this instead of using ciphertext.
Right.
Well, in my experience, it's not wise to bet on anything actually happening in the tech industry in the last couple of weeks of December. So I wouldn't be shocked if we end up waiting until the new year for review and real progress here. Besides which, nobody ought to be implementing Mimi over the holiday break. So hopefully nobody's really champing at the bit.
Okay, next PR is 37. And this is the removal of last seen.
I mean, presumably this goes hand in hand with the previous PR, and I assume it has like the same requirements for review, right?
No, this has nothing to do with the message ID.
Oh, excuse me. I should read what it says before I mouth off.
So
I mostly just clocked Conrad in the reviewers list.
I did, yeah. but the it's just because he commented on the issue, not because there's not any particular cryptographic issue. In last seen is just an assertion by the client. It could be totally wrong, right? It could be malicious. So the discussion in the issue number 27 there, that has the context, but basically this was added when we didn't think that we had a hub accepted time. Now we have a hub accepted time, and so the only issue that we have is how do we prevent a malicious hub from reordering messages. But the last seen is only a partial solution to that problem. And it also creates an environment where if a malicious sender, an honest hub, or a malicious or an honest sender and malicious hub situation are indistinguishable. And so the client really can't make a decision because they can't distinguish those two cases. So we really need a different mechanism other than last seen, in my opinion, to be able to detect changes that were made by the hub in the ordering of messages. And so that's probably some other extension at the end-to-end encrypted level, like AppBack or the delivery notification mechanism in Mimi. Timo.
Yeah, it's me again. Did you see my last comment on the issue we have open right now about
on issue 27 or on the PR?
27, which is that the client also adds the timestamp. Would that help the issue?
So the problem is that an honest client that has a clock that's off, this is a traditional huge source of problems where what do you do if the client timestamp is just barely off, it's like just on the threshold, right? It's not a very satisfactory solution if you don't have synchronized clocks. And the IETF is very leery of, has been burned by solutions that required synchronized clocks. And like the LAMPS group that is responsible for managing like changes to certificates has particularly like hated timestamp based.
Okay, but my proposal was not to deny the event completely, but just show a warning to the client that there's something weird going on with the timestamps.
The typical leeways are like on the order of 5 minutes, and that's enough for an attack.
Okay, fair enough.
So the usual recommendation is that you have a pretty big leeway, and if it's on the order of more than a minute, then you allow for the attack that you're trying to prevent.
Okay, I was worried about a client injecting history like an hour or days before.
I mean, really, these kind of attacks are generally very effective in the like 30-second to 2 or 3 minute kind of time frames, because people tend to send messages one after the other. So it's like merely in 20 seconds you could have somebody send a message, somebody reply, and a third message after that, and then you flip the order of the last two messages and you cause them to, say the opposite of what they.
Yeah, I see. Thank you. But I'm interested in what other solutions you had in mind.
So specifically the ideas that came up were using the Mimi message delivery confirmation. So if somebody gets a message or doesn't get a message, it's like, wait a minute, why didn't that message get delivered? It's not a complete solution, but it means if somebody got the message, then you know that it arrived at the hub, and you know what the hub timestamp was, and you can compare that. The message franking mechanism also also causes the hub to commit to a specific time. So that if the sender sends the message, and it's using franking, the message that is sent back to the client will have the hub accepted time with an integrity check that the client can use. So the client itself can say, wait a minute, this hub accepted time doesn't match a time that I expected it should have been received. And then, of course, there's the AppAct mechanism, and we could define additional mechanisms. And I think Richard Barnes mentioned that, there's plenty of things that we could do using application state to have sort of a hash transcript of a bunch of different messages in an epic.
Okay, thank you. I will look into it.
So to refocus a bit on the pull request that we were discussing, it seems like we've just been having a discussion about a problem and we're not certain what to do about it. But in that case, is the idea here that we know that the last thing that we have right now doesn't work, we want to get rid of it and then investigate what to replace it with later?
That's my view.
All right. So then, setting aside the discussion that will ostensibly continue in issue 27, I think the question for the working group now is, are we comfortable moving forward with the change in pull request 37? Right, which is essentially setting the stage for solving 27.
Okay. In any case, it sounds like we should get a few more eyeballs on this before removing it, but removing it doesn't mean that we don't have a solution, or it doesn't mean that we have that we're not going to continue working on this problem.
Yeah, I just want to say, yes, I'm in favor of removing it as well.
Yeah, I think this is if you object to removing this, please say something in the next, in the next 3 weeks, but not, that doesn't mean that we're not going to keep working on the problem. It just won't be this. Okay. Should we go to protocol?
Yeah, sorry, just catching up, taking notes here.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
It's all good. Yeah, okay, so right, protocol side. Do you want to start with 94 or 96?
Let's start with 94, I guess.
Very good, sir. Excellent choice.
Okay. So this one is pretty straightforward. There is, if you look at the files, so the intention when I did this was to be able to allow somebody to do a first and last name search, but of course you couldn't do that because you didn't have both. You couldn't query on two different things at the same time. So by saying you could have multiple query elements that have an and semantic, that would allow you to search, for example, for, I want somebody with this first and this last name, or someone with this last name in this organization, or whatever, that would exactly match. And then there were a bunch of semantics in this search identifier type enum that weren't specified at all what they meant. And I even had to go back to my old notes to remind myself what two of them meant. So anyway, I just made those explicit in this PR. So it's just a bunch of additional language describing what those semantics are. So I don't think we've gotten, we haven't gotten comments on this PR. If somebody does want to bring something up about this, feel free right now, but I would say, you know, this needs to get some review before we can merge it, but before we do anything with it. But feel free to bring it up now if you've got a thought about it, or particularly if you've read it. Okay.
So the challenge here is, once again, I wouldn't anticipate anybody reviewing it before January, but hopefully when we reconvene in the middle of January, we, unless something else, you know, more urgent comes up in the agenda, we'll be doing another like issue or PR scrub. So we'll review this at that time, note it's still pending review, and then maybe we can, like, come January, we can more actively say assign somebody the action item of reviewing this. Mm-hmm. If nothing's happened in the intervening weeks.
Yeah. Okay. So,
but one thing I want to clarify, like, generally my bias would be to say, but, you know, hey, if the author of the document wants to do a thing and for several weeks nobody's objected, usually I would say, like, okay, let's go ahead and do it. But here specifically, you would really like to get some review, some second.
I would like to have at least one person, at least one other pair of eyeballs look at it. But harm the document. I think this is okay to merge after there has been one, you know, at least one other person has given a look at it.
All right. Given that, I think the path forward here is what I was saying, that we can, we can leave it as is, and we'll catch it in sort of the safety net of eventually doing a scrub over open items on these repositories. So we're not going to lose track of this. And
okay, moving on to 96. This is a simplification to the franking mechanism, which in the current document has 2 hashes. So there's a franking context hash, and a frank integrity check. So this just combines everything into a single franking integrity check. And I don't think that we lose any properties here. I would look, you know, if I could generate a version of the draft and from this PR and send it to CFRG, this would be the version that I would send to CFRG, because that's what we decided we wanted to do in the previous interim. Not sure if I can make the CI do that, to have something up on github.io, but I'll try to come up with a solution for that here. But this is basically what's in this PR is what I would want to send to CFRG. If anybody has an objection, you know, like I could potentially merge it, or we could leave it and I could try to find a workaround that CFRG can use to look at this mechanism in a nice to read format. Raphael, maybe?
I have to admit, I'm not certain what the best way is to socialize this with CFRG, but like as chair, I guess it's, you know, mine and Alyssa's problem in the extreme to say go talk to their chairs and find out what would be successful here. That being said, I wonder if maybe Richard, just to throw somebody under the bus here, Richard, if maybe you have opinions about what would be a good way to get traction in CFRG for feedback on this.
I mean, you can start by emailing me on the list, of course. But if you had some folks, you know, reach out to some individuals that might make sense, I can volunteer to be one of those. But yeah, if we could find a couple of individuals who are active in CFRG, that could probably help spark some discussion.
Would anybody have any serious heartburn if we merge this so that there is at least the editor's copy is something that people who want to look at it can look at it in, if they're CFRG folks that want to review it?
That seems like it would be the more expeditious path for getting good, high quality commentary from CFRG folks.
Does anybody have any serious concern about that? I mean, we can always revert this if we need to.
We're probably still several revisions away from a final MIMI protocol, so it's not the end of the world if we take something now that we know may change. That seems like a good way forward.
Raphael?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I mean, CFRG is going to review the whole thing, obviously, and not just that. So this is just one more thing that needs to be reviewed. So I think we should go ahead.
Okay. All righty. Hey, Richard, do you happen to already have slides for tomorrow for AppSync to discuss the changes?
Unfortunately, no, that was on my to-do list for this afternoon.
Okay. All right. I think I will go ahead and I'll wing it, describing what's in AppSync here. So whenever you're ready, Tim, I can. Well, maybe the HTML version is easier to read. I think the HTML. Well, yeah, this is fine. Okay, so the part that's most relevant to us is.
Sorry, hang on a second, Rowan. Timo, I saw you were just in the queue. Is there something you'd like to ask before we dive into this?
I wanted to ask a quick question about MIMI protocol, but we can do it later too.
Go ahead.
So it says MIMI protocol uses TLS presentation language as a placeholder, as a set of binary encodings and transport. How determined is that currently? Would it make sense to start implementing the exact format already?
The only other credible proposal that we got for another protocol on which to base this was to use XMPP. And I don't believe that there is, I don't believe that there's political will at IETF for us to, to do. Even I personally think that XMPP is an excellent protocol, and there are ways to go and do things with XMPP that don't even, you could define a bulk mode between two XMPP servers that doesn't even use angle brackets, that specifies stanzas using quick, for example. But that said, I don't think that there's a lot of.
I was coming from
in favor of using XMPP. Who are not already implementers of XMPP.
I was mostly thinking about the binary format, which MIMI content uses CBOR, and this uses rigid binary syntax.
Mm-hmm.
But I assume that's meant to be.
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of the reasons to use CBOR in content are related to the sort of more extensible, more flexible kind of expectations of, first of all, your extensions might be sent without a priori negotiation, where it just might be a hey, here's some extra stuff that you might be able to do something interesting with. Whereas Mimi protocol, we probably want to avoid having that style, like a non-negotiated extensibility mechanism.
Yeah. Okay.
Also, because
I understand.
Mimi protocol includes a lot of MLS structs inside of it, those which are going to be formatted in TLS, in TLS presentation language. So there was definitely a reason to kind of go with TLS presentation language for Mimi protocol. That doesn't mean it's set in stone, but there hasn't been somebody who said, hey, like, I really want to go and implement Mimi protocol using CPOR.
Okay. Yeah, I see. That makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, back to AppSync. So basically, this is actually a really big change because this isn't just an AppSync proposal anymore. This is kind of a replacement for what was the proposal type, which was called AppSync, and for a bunch of stuff that was in the safe extensions framework in MLS extensions. So the idea here is that this is a safe API for applications using MLS. And it just happens to be in a draft that's called MLS AppSync. But focusing just on the parts that are related to what was in the AppSync proposal type before, if we go to attaching chapter 8, section 8, attaching application data MLS messages. So here there is basically a group context extension that has a bunch of data from individual components. And so this is like, I've got the data for all the data for this component is here. All the data for this component is here. The component IDs are sorted in numerical order. And then the question is, okay, so you can use that in your group context extension to so that application state is in the group and gets key agreement or gets agreement with via the MLS mechanism. And then we have how we update it. So if you go to the next section, 9, updating application data in the group context. So this has, instead of an AppSync proposal, it has an application data update proposal. So this says, here is my update message. I can either update this, I can change, either add or update the contents of a particular component, or I can completely remove it. So I don't need this component in the application state at all. In the case of an update, each component defines what the format of that update is. And a perfectly reasonable format of the update might be just to wholesale replace it with the new thing. There's also a calculation of, all right, here is the application state, and then here's the representation of that state in the group context extension. So that representation, it might be in a different format. It might be exactly the same. It might be a hash. But the component defines what the representation is and what the update format is. So maybe that would be more straightforward if we look at some examples. So for that reason, I would say, let's look at the app components draft because it has some examples.
Okay, hold please.
And by the way, what we just, what I just mentioned, Richard is going to be presenting this in the MLS interim meeting tomorrow at the same time that this interim is taking place. Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, I was just going to say that overall, like there's not a huge change here. Like there's a big kind of reframing of this together with the state extension stuff, but the bits that look like AppSync still look sort of like AppSync. Mm-hmm. It's just the major change that we've made clearer the cut point between MLS and the application. And in particular, we've gotten MLS out of the business of knowing anything about diffs or about the structure of the application data. That's the major change here from the AppSync point of view.
Yeah. So here we've got, I've got 4 different component definitions. One of these is for room metadata. So this is like, people change the name of the room in some like Discord or IRC type systems. People often change the subject and the mood. Ordinary participants can change it, and they change it quite frequently. You can have an avatar, right? So this is a set of data that you could go and update, and that you'd like everybody to have an agreement about what's there, and maybe you'd like this to be the data that is stored in the group context is just the data, is just the room metadata, because it's pretty small. And when you do an update, you just update all of it. You just do a wholesale replace of all the room metadata. Obviously, in order to be able to do an update of this, you need to have the appropriate privileges to do that, the appropriate authorization. Okay, moving down to, and please, anybody if you've got a question, stop me, but I'm kind of trying to go through this a little bit quickly and go through this logically so that people just get an idea, and then they can go back and read it to see, okay, what about this? What about that? Okay, moving down to role-based access control. So I already brought up this concept in the room policy topic that I discussed a couple of interims ago, and also in Dublin. But here, this is a concrete instantiation of how do you define a role. So here, each role has a role index. It has a role. It can have it has a role name, which would be just so you can show it to somebody who's editing the role, so they have like some names associated. So this might be admin or moderator or new participant or whatever. You can have a more detailed role description that could be a null string, an empty string. And then you have a list of role capabilities. So this would just be a vector, a list of specific IANA registered capabilities, and says, okay, all these capabilities, they're associated with this role. There's no sort of concept of inheritance. So it's not like, if you could have in your UI, if you were defining roles, you could say, yeah, like an admin has all the privileges of an ordinary user. You wouldn't have some inheritance mechanism in here. You would just enumerate all the capabilities that the ordinary user had, plus the additional capabilities that the admin had. Then finally, there are 4 integers here which are related to constraints. So the idea here is that you wouldn't be able to, a lot of people want to be able to have something to say, you can't have a group without an admin or without a moderator, say. And so you would say for this particular role, this is the maximum, this is the minimum number of participants you can have. And then optionally, this is the maximum number of participants you can have. Or this is the minimum number of active participants you can have. This is a maximum number of active participants you can have. So we can debate, at a later time, we can go talk about whether things are missing, whether these things are, there's a simpler way to go and get some of the behavior that motivated these choices. But this is a pretty simple structure. Again, you want this to be available in the group context. So like here, this structure just gets represented directly in the group in the component and the group context. And the update is just a wholesale replacement. Updating the way that roles work in rooms, it shouldn't be something that happens very often. And it's not a very big update in any case. We're talking about, you know, a few hundred bytes maybe. Okay, scrolling down to participant list.
I have a question about the roles, if you may.
Yeah.
So we also have that in the mini policy stuff. How does that relate?
I wanted to put this in a standalone draft so that people could read it top to bottom without getting distracted with ideas about, you know, bots and delivery notification status and all sorts of other things. I think the right way to do this would be for us to get consensus on some of these components, and then to merge this into room policy, or to merge it directly into the protocol draft.
Okay.
And I'm open to suggestions. Does that sound okay, Raphael?
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I didn't understand that this was not meant to be a long-term standalone document.
Yep. Okay, so moving down to participant list. So we've already mentioned participant list from the very, very beginning of the MIMI protocol document. We've talked about the idea of having or from the beginning of the MIMI protocol as a working group item. So here we have a list of users that are in a room, and each user has assigned a role. And that's expressed using the role index. So here I have, you know, Alice is an ordinary user, Bob is an ordinary user, or, you know, Alice is an administrator, Bob's an ordinary user, Kathy is an ordinary user, and Doug is also an administrator. Here, the update format is a little different. So the update format is a patch. So it says, basically, remove these users with these indices, update users with this index with the following to have the following role, and add these new participants. And the authorization of one of these updates, this would need to follow, again, the rules according to the capabilities that the sender's role had using the roles that were listed above. So you need to have permission to be able to change somebody's role. You'd need to have permission to be able to remove a particular user. It might be you're removing yourself, or it might be you're removing other users, right? If you want to add participants, you need to have permission to add participants. It might be that you're adding a participant who is yourself, and you're doing that by virtue of some other authorization that you got, for example, in a join link. But all of these kind of patches, they would need to be authorized. But there's a patch, and this patch, this update, it gets sent to, it gets turned into something that modifies the participant list, and then the actual group context is the participant list. We could have a different type of these. We could have a different thing that we wanted, where we only needed to have the hash in the MLS group context extension. In this case, I think it's very useful for us to have the entire participant list, because we need it in order to do authorization. And if we need to go and fetch it externally, then it creates a bunch of race conditions where we might not be able to authorize something. We might be in a loop waiting to authorize commits. And we want, I believe we want that path to be very clean and very fast, and to have as few race conditions as possible. But for things which are less sort of critical to the authorization of commits, then I think it's perfectly reasonable for us to have some additional data in here where we're just storing a hash in the MLS state, and we can keep the rest of the state separately outside in some other protocol. Okay, so there's one last concept in this components draft, which is pre-authorized participants. The idea here is that in many environments, particularly enterprise environments, you might have users that have not joined, and you don't want to need to enumerate them because the list of them may change every time you hire and fire people. Or this might be like where you've got, say, like a healthcare provider, and they want to allow anybody who is a current member of a health plan with this health insurance company to be able to join relevant groups, right? So here, the idea is that given a particular set of claims, which all have to match, so an ANDed set of claims, you can there's a role associated that you're allowed to join as. So I join and I automatically get that role. So for example, I could be an employee of a particular company. I'm a resident of a specific country. And then as a result of that, I get access to the benefits discussion group for, say, French employees or US employees or Taiwan employees of this particular company, because I'm an employee and I'm an employee of that company and I live in the appropriate jurisdiction. Likewise, if I was somebody working in the human resources department or in the benefits department, I may get automatically the permission to join this group as a moderator. And so this allows for the pre-authorized participants list to be fairly short and stable over a long period of time. It can still be modified, but it doesn't need to be, it doesn't need to be modified. You don't need to modify the participant list with a bunch of participants that may or may not ever join in the future. And you also don't need to dynamically update the participant list. The sort of when you move somebody from, sorry, scratch that. Anyway, I think this has a lot of power, and I think it's also relatively straightforward. So that is a preview. Raphael.
Yeah, I have a comment on that. So aside from the particular roads, to some degree, we can already implement that using external senders in MLS, right? Do we need this added complexity at all?
So the question is, how does a client authorize that some activity taken by an external proposer or an external joiner was allowed?
I mean, that's a matter of policy.
So that's exactly what this is covering. This is about the authorization. So this is different. This is basically a policy definition.
Okay, so it's not actually about new members joining the group. It's more about once they have joined, what can they do?
That's why it's about the role that they get if they join. Right.
Okay, that makes sense. It's still pretty comprehensive and adds a lot of complexity. I just want to put that out there. But yeah, I think it would be useful if we had more buy-in from different parties for this. It's taking it pretty far, I guess, compared to other areas we've been working on.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the like we have pretty strong consensus on participant lists, and we have strong consensus on roles with capabilities. That's the kind of we had a vigorous discussion about that. Pre-authorized participants is not quite brand new, but it's pretty new. I mean, this concept has appeared in individual drafts that I submitted, going back a year and a half, but never really got any feedback or discussion. But I do think that this solves a lot of the problems that we will have in Mimi, and that some of which we've already discussed. And there may be a number of other totally valid ways to address those, but we've never had a discussion about things that are sort of at that level of sophistication yet. So,
right. So maybe another way that is more in favor of this change, another way to phrase it would be that this would allow like future participants to join asynchronously with an external commit and fit right in, as opposed to having to wait for an admin that can probably already do all of these things, without that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, today an admin could add someone and give them an exact role and whatnot.
Right.
And then when I say admin, I mean, someone who has a role that allows to do that. So fundamentally, what this solves is very similar to an external commit, is to make such an operation asynchronous without having to rely on anyone being online.
Well, it's authorization of an external commit, and then subsequently being able to do things like be able to become a moderator automatically or an admin automatically as you join, right?
Yeah, right. But essentially, it's an adaptation of the currently existing concept of roles and authorization, an adaptation of that to external commits specifically. That's a problem it actually solves.
Yeah.
Okay. I think then in that case it makes a ton of sense to have it.
Cool. All right. Does anybody else want to say anything along these lines? So if not, I think we could quit early.
So, okay, I don't have specific thoughts about like the structure of these messages. Rather, I'm interested, I guess, from a chair point of view, in the path for this document. So you clarified, Raphael, earlier that like probably the objective here is not, in fact, to adopt, much less ratify this as an RFC. But the point is, this is more of a discussion tool to help contextualize and justify the MLS layer work for AppSync, right?
I think that this is something that we would eventually merge into Mimi
Yes, right.
policy, but
Right.
But right now we need to be able to discussing how AppSync works without any components is really hard.
Okay, yeah, but so the objective here then is to what we aim to do here, right, is continue pushing on the work at the MLS layer, using this draft to help contextualize it. Then as the work materializes in MLS through adoption and then eventually our RFCification, whatever happens there, then we would reflect that with changes to policy or protocol documents in Mimi.
Yeah.
Okay, that works for me.
All right, that's all.
Then, yeah,
that's all I got.
Right, as Rowan said, so sounds like that's it for both AppSync and app components, as well as all the opens work on content and protocol. So yeah, well, I guess we'll adjourn. So then the last thing I'll note is more interims coming up. Well, I guess I should give a shout out, as Rowan alluded to. There's an MLS interim tomorrow at this same time in your time zone. Sounds like there's a lot of relevant stuff discussed there. So I would urge folks to go, I suppose, if they feel inclined to do so. Otherwise, our next interim for Mimi is scheduled for January 15th, again at this same time. So as usual, please let the chairs know at mimi-chairs@ietf.org if there's something you want to discuss. And last thing I want to say before I let you all go is that in response to a lot of the feedback that they received, the authors of the Discovery Requirements individual draft, they have a new version up that they put up in late November. I'd like to urge everybody to give it a read in anticipation of a forthcoming potential adoption call on that new draft. And yeah, please provide them feedback either privately or on the list. All right, that's it. Everybody, you get a half hour back. Wait, sorry, unless Alyssa, do you have anything before we adjourn?
Nope. Thank you, Rowan, for carrying the day there. Happy holidays.
All right.
All right. Yeah.
Then we'll see everybody in
Please,
MLS
please,
or next
I
year.
would love to have some other people up here presenting on stuff, or at least, you know, like giving comments. So,
Yep. Agreed.
okay. Happy holidays.
Hey,
Raphael?
everyone. See you.
Thanks.